Welcome, my friends, to another installment of the Fat Man's revisitation of the Middle-earth role-playing game system, also known as MERP, produced by Iron Crown Enterprises back in the 80s. It is what it is, right? And this is one of their earlier supplement modules. Came out as part of a package set. You can't really see these very well, but here's the original core book, and there's Sheila's Cave, the Hillman, Bree, and this is like book 5 or module 5, and it's verges on a lot of ice products, verges on being a source book or a mini source book, because it focuses on a sliver or a very, I don't want to call it important, but a very unique location in Middle Earth, and expands on it. But this one here has a lot of depth and detail to it, because the Paths of the Dead and the Stone of Erech play a prominent role in the success of the Lord of the Rings as the heroes. Aragorn is destined to visit this place and call upon the King of the Dead to summon the army of the undead to fulfill an oath that in living they had failed to do to his great sire Isildur, and so in the process, Aragorn gains a very potent force that allows him to carry the field at the Battle of Minas Tirith, as well as several key encounters all along the path to that point, which they barely graze over in the movies and in the books. We know they're important, they just don't focus on them. The Vale of Erech and the upper Morthid Valley is a section of western Gondor. I don't remember if this had a color map with it or not. I know that it has several. Here it shows, several maps in the covers, which is traditional for these folks. Here's the area map. So Minas Tirith, if you had a map, would be way over here. So we can see that we're technically south of the White Mountains. Just north of here is the Agralad, the Glittering Caves, and the Hornburg, and it's through, or not the Hornburg, but it's the place where the Romerium gather before heading south, and Aragorn breaks apart from it. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli leave the Horse Lords to their plan, and they take the Path of the Dead. So they enter through the northern entrance to the Undead Kingdom, and come out the other side, and this is where they come out, and it's barely briefly mentioned in the movie and in the books a little bit more. Of Middle Earth, perhaps one of the most haunted regions of western Middle Earth is this location in this vicinity, and the mountain vales around it, in part because this is the gathering place of the unsettled spirits of these ancient men who failed to uphold their oaths to defend Gondor's borders when called upon, and because of that, it's the locals who live in the area are keenly aware of pertinent areas you don't go to, especially after dark, because you're likely to have problems. And the next most haunted area of Middle Earth that I'm aware of would be the Barrow Downs, and we're all familiar with what happens there with Frodo and his little party. So it's the Barrow Downs on a grander scale. The introduction, of course, is the bonding of the Dunedain and the Daen Coentis. At the same time, the Indian settlers came across the sea from numerous, ever-increasing numbers. The high men and Westernese were more efficient farmers. See, this is another key mention. I mentioned in one of the other vlogs I just recently did about the fact that only 9 ships of the faithful came out of the wreck of Nurmur to bring basically the royal bloodline to Arnor and Gondor. But in the years and centuries prior to that, the Dunedain had been settling in Middle Earth for a long, long time, and so it's there was already a core group of high men in existence here before Isildur and Anorin and his or Elendil and his sons come and bring their families. So in this case, the oath breaking brings that up. The curse of the oath breakers, the expansion of Lambden. Third Age 569, Thurambor, the ninth king of Gondor, grants to Gondor, younger son of a lesser Dunedain household, the Morthod Valley of Lambden promise to hold as a crown fief. Uh, Gondor, styled the Prince of Morthod, began the construction of what was to become Morthodost, the Black Root fortress at the seat of the princes of Morthod. His son Thorodor and grandson Eredan also worked on the fortress, was not completed and named until Third Age 714, blah, blah, blah. So we got the history of the local region, how it got established. Of course, we got the geography and the flora and fauna as typical of ice. They go several pages worth of the inhabitants, the Dunlandings, the Dunedain, the northern folk, dark races, undead races. Like I said, next to the Barrow Downs, this is probably the most concentrated area or largest area of concentrated undead, and they have to deal with it. So you got the undead races here, as in ghouls, skeletons, wraiths, ghosts, politics of the region, sites of interest. The Hill of Erech is an interesting and strange little side note in the novels, and I was kind of puzzled about it. Great grassy hill rises from the emptying rolling fields 3 miles southeast of Stone of Erech. This is the Hill of Erech, the most commanding point in the vale of the same name, revered by the Daen Coentis and the Dunlandings. It is now a haunted height, thus its name, the frightful place. Atop the hill is a half-buried stone of Erech, a black glass-lined globe commonly believed to be one of the holy stones used by the Daen Coentis. Locals believe that the stone fell from the sky as a sign that this spot is the center of the world. But the learned know better, for the Erech Stone is an ion ore born from Nurmor and erected by Isildur in Second Age 3320. By this stone the Danes swore an allegiance to the Gondor, and it is here that the army of the dead shall gather when summoned to write the oath breaking. For now, however, ghosts come to the hill every night, guarding its spiral path and the secret of the Stone of Erech, or the Erech Stone. So this was a stone that's roughly 6 feet in diameter that was brought from Nurmur by the faithful and placed here. It doesn't say that it does anything else. It's not connected to the planetary. It's not magical in nature that's by any understanding, although somehow or another it is a very potent symbol to create this oath binding to these people, to these hill people, who, when they fail to uphold their oath, find themselves as a race dwindling into non-existence and unable to pass on to the next life, so to speak. The path of the dead, the Orsan, the town of Orsanan, blah. So then we get into the adventures, selecting an adventure, choosing a time period, suggesting, running adventures in the Vale of the Erech, the tale journeying into the Vale. Just journeying in here and wandering around is an adventure of itself, just because of the sheer number of undead that you're going to deal with. And it's kind of I don't know. I kind of view this neck of Gondor as some sort of reincarnation of Transylvania to some degree, without any great vampire lord running things. So by day you've got these normal villagers and frontier noblemen who do their thing, and at night lock their doors and windows tight, because then the undead roam the countryside, and that the woods and the high vales in the woods and the hills are often, cloaked in mists and fogs, and a lot of stuff goes on that people tend to not like to, you know, talk about, maybe out of fear and out of concern, but somewhat out of pride too. Professional Stone of Erech, nice, good sized town. This also is a good example of what sets Gondor apart from Arnor. I've mentioned this before in one of the, in Rangers of the North, the Kingdom of Arthedain's entry. The fact that in the north, the Arthedain or the Arnorians never created large community networks. Okay, you don't see large numbers of villages and towns interconnected by roadways, as you do in Gondor. Down up north, you've got two major roads: the Greenway and the Great West East Road, and there's Bree. And of course, the villages of the Shire, which don't really count in this aspect. You've got the great city of Fornos and the great city of Anus Minus, however it's pronounced. Then there's a handful of villages and towns, but nothing on the scale that you see in Gondor. In Gondor, it's what you would expect to see of a very successful, large-scale, kingdom, right? So down here, we've got far more numerous in Gondor. There's far more larger numbers of Dunedain, and then they got what they call Lesser Dunedain, which is the Anorians avoided quite heavily. They rarely married outside of their bloodline, so to speak, and so they dwindled in part because there weren't a numerous group of people to begin with, and they didn't propagate. So if the second son never found a proper Dunedain wife, he never married. And where in the South, you've got the possibility of marrying into a lesser race of people was not frowned upon necessarily by the rank and file of the Dunedain. And you saw the weakening of the Dunedain bloodlines, their life expectancy shrunk and things like this, but there were far more of them. And it made it for them to be more successful. So, NPCs, the Vale of the Erech, prominent town folk, a lot of good NPC material. I always like that because I can utilize these things in other stuff. And once again, we got a nice little castle set up here, blueprint wise. The layouts in here, good stuff to borrow for other game systems, but in and of itself, it's not a bad. I ran one campaign that focused in this area to some degree. We ran into some issues with translating. Now, I've said this in many times. Uh, God bless Rollmaster. I like the Rollmaster system, but it's chunky, it's chewy, it's bulky to some degree. It takes some getting used to, especially in the younger, newer gaming groups. And when I say that is because some of us old hats, we played the D100 systems. We understood Rollmaster and GURPS and things like this much better back then because there wasn't such a variety. And it wasn't a dominance on the D20 style system that pretty much dominates everything now. That said, I often found it much easier to just translate. I took the rule book for the game and set it off to the side, and I brought the rule books for Dungeons and Dragons in because everybody was familiar with it. They understood it. The downside was translating that material over to the sandbox that is Middle Earth was a bit more of a challenge. And one of the challenging aspects is the lack of religion in Tolkien. In the traditional concept of religion, they don't have the gods and goddess pantheons that you see in a lot of other fantasy settings. Just because the High Lords, and like the elves, were aware, and the elves, and the aspect of many of the elves, especially the higher level, the higher class of case of elves, actually encounter the gods the creators every damn day. They encountered them all the time. There was nothing awe-inspiring. They were still enamored and respectful and on and on, but they didn't deify them to the degree that humans do. And in Lord of the Rings, many of the lesser races have their pantheons and their gods. A lot of their gods are just renamed after the Elvish the Elvish quote gods and the creators, and so on and so forth. So when you translate this over, trying to find a large religious base for clerics is difficult. So of all the classes, the cleric was one of the roughest ones to be able to translate over to this sandbox, in part because you couldn't use the regular theology that goes behind them. You could not use the pantheons that were created for them. So if you have, we don't have dark elves as in Drow in Lord of the Rings. The idea of dark elves in Lord of the Rings is elves who settled in the Far East, never came west, never seen the light of the Undying Lands, and thus were not blessed by, the creators. So in that aspect, they are dark, but they're still elf, just like any elf. Uh, the human, lesser humans, well, they have their pantheons and stuff. So you can have some clerics based on those, but it was much more of a challenge. It was just easier to say he's a cleric, and then come up with some fictional clerical body, because you don't see a large contingent of religion in Lord of the Rings. You just don't. We're in like a lot of Middle East, the medieval mindset of the sword and sorcery and hack and slash game systems that we play, where they have their pantheons well established, and it's thick. You go into every major city, and there's not a temple. There's could be scores of temples. Well, you go into any major city in Middle Earth, there are no temples. There are no some vast monolithic structures devoted to this person or that person, with the exception of the Dark Lord. So it's possible to go into some eastern countries or into places where the orcs reside, and you will have shrines to Sauron and Morgoth and so on and so forth. And because they pushed it more, because the political power that comes behind manipulating weaker minds. We won't get into religion. I'm just not going to do it outside of gameplay. Okay, that is what it is. Here you go. Paths of the Dead. It's a good supplement, a good module. Good read just for the sake of reading it. A bit of a challenge to play it though, just a little. All right, there you go.